A reading from the book of Exodus. Moses said to all the congregation of the Israelites, "This is the thing that the Lord has commanded. Take from among you an offering to the Lord. Let whoever is of a generous heart bring the Lord's offering: gold, silver, and bronze, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and fine linen, goat's hair, tanned ram skins, and fine leather, acacia wood, oil for the light, spices for the anointing oil and for the fragrant incense, and onyx stones and gems to be set in the ephod and the breastpiece. All who are skillful among you shall come and make all that the Lord has commanded: the tabernacle, its tent and its covering, its clasps and its frames, its bars, its pillars, and its bases, the table with its poles and all its utensils, and the bread of the presence, the finely worked vestments for ministering in the holy places, the holy vestments for the priest Aaron, and the vestments of his sons for their servants as priests." Then all the congregation of the Israelites withdrew from the presence of Moses, and they came, everyone whose heart was stirred and everyone whose spirit was willing, and brought the Lord's offering to be used for the tent of meeting, and for all its service, and for the sacred vestments. So they came, both men and women. All who were of a willing heart brought brooches and earrings and signet rings and pendants, all sorts of gold objects, everyone bringing an offering of gold to the Lord. All the Israelite men and women whose hearts made them willing to bring anything for the work that the Lord had commanded by Moses to be done, brought it as a free will offering to the Lord. They still kept bringing him free will offerings every morning, so that all the artisans who were doing every sort of task on the sanctuary came, each from the task being performed, and said to Moses, "The people are bringing much more than enough for doing the work that the Lord has commanded us to do." So Moses gave command, and word was proclaimed throughout the camp: no man or woman is to make anything else as an offering for the sanctuary. So the people were restrained from bringing, for what they had already brought was more than enough to do all the work.
I discovered a fascinating little fact this past week. Did you know that Las Vegas, the gambling capital of the world, where all the betting is taking place this week over the Super Bowl that is to take place tonight? Did you know that in Las Vegas, they actually have more churches than they do casinos? It's true. It's true. According to the travel book, Another Las Vegas, there are 2 churches for every 1 casino in Sin City. For every Caesar's Palace, there are 2 Baptist churches. For every Treasure Island, there are 2 Methodist churches. For every Bellagio, Luxor, Mandalay Bay, and Harrah's, there are 2 Catholic, Congregational, Presbyterian, Episcopal, and Assembly of God churches. Now, can't one only imagine the challenges faced by being a church in Las Vegas, Nevada? And not surprisingly, according to Christian Century magazine, one of the biggest challenges these churches face is that some worshipers will give casino chips rather than cash when the Sunday morning offering is taken. And since these chips come from many different casinos, each of which honors its own chip, then these churches have devised a unique method for sorting and converting their variety of chips conveniently back into cold, hard cash. How do they do it? Once a month, the churches of Las Vegas send all their collected chips from their Sunday morning offerings to a nearby Franciscan monastery for sorting. And then these chips are taken to the casinos of origin to be cashed in by a small group of these Franciscan monks dedicated to this task. And then these dedicated monks redistribute the sorted funds to the appropriate churches, of course, retaining a small commission for themselves. And everybody wins: the giver, the church, and the monastery. In fact, these enterprising monks who've turned chips into cash have become so appreciated that they've been given a nickname by the Las Vegas churches. They're now called chipmunks. Hey, it's a true story. Take it out on me. Now, I open with this story this morning because I got to admit that I feel a little like one of those chipmunks this morning. I really do, because today's Stewardship Sunday, and I'm hoping that each of you will choose over the next few weeks to bring forth treasures of every kind for us to sort and to distribute to the work of this great church and to the work of God. So how do I inspire you to do that? Well, there are libraries of books on how churches ought to conduct stewardship campaigns. Some say you have to have fancy slogans. Some say you have to employ psychological insights on giving. Some say you have to suggest a spiritual inspiration for motivation. And I must admit that as I sit down every year to write this sermon on the amount, that I do find myself wistfully looking back at what must have been the striking oratorical power of Moses, who preached the first sermon on the amount in what was the kickoff of the first stewardship drive we have in the biblical text. Because as you heard it read, Moses did not preach a long sermon. He had no slogan, no psychology, no charts or graphs. In fact, his sermon was simply comprised of one sentence. And here's the interesting thing. That one sentence, the Bible tells us, was powerful enough to bring about an avalanche of giving from his congregation. One sentence. Now, before we talk about that one sentence, allow me to set the scene for Moses' inspirational speech. Years before, in a time of famine, the Israelites had made their way to Egypt. Originally, they were welcomed there, but in time, they were enslaved by these Egyptians. And they became oppressed to the point that their spirits were broken. They cried out to God for help, and God responded by sending Moses to be their leader and to set his people free. When trouble came to Egypt, God let that trouble pass over the Israelites. When they set off towards the promised land, God parted the Red Sea for them to pass through. When they nearly starved in the desert, God provided manna from heaven to feed them. When they needed water, God instructed Moses to strike a rock where cold water came forth. Why, even when the children of Israel rebelled against God's law and built an idol of a golden calf, God forgave them. In fact, God forgave them again and again and again and again. And that forgiveness can be seen in that despite these people's quarrelsome, troublesome, fickle, and frequently false nature, God still decided to renew God's covenant with them. God saying that I am your God to the people of Israel, and you will be my people. So that's where chapter 34 of Exodus ends. And now, as we pick up chapter 35, we see that something special has happened to these people. The people have yet to make it into the promised land, yes, but from the vantage point, they can almost see the wonderful future ahead. In the distance, they can see the land of milk and honey. They can see the land that God has promised. And then looking back, the people realized what's been going on for them. They realized that God's hand has been present and everything up to that moment. That God had been nudging and urging and sustaining and supporting them every step of the way from Egypt. And because of that, they finally have the good sense to acknowledge what God had done for them and be grateful. Now let's stop right there for a moment. I don't know about you, but I really do believe that every life ought to have some moment of reflection, like this moment in the lives of the people of Israel, don't you think? Every life ought to have some moment when we're able to look back and remember all that we have been given and forgiven. Do you have that in your life? Do you have the good sense to look back on the past and be grateful for all that has been? Yeah, I can imagine most of us could note the times when there was hunger and thirst, either literal or maybe for purpose or significance or love or hope in our past. And if we found those hungers and thirst satisfied, the question becomes, have we given credit where credit was due? Have we credited God for that? Maybe we can look back and note times in our lives when we were lost and directionless, like the children of Israel. And if anything served as our pillar of cloud and fire during those times to guide us, have we had the good sense to be grateful and to thank God for a new direction? It's an important question, you know. Have we taken time to reflect and give thanks? Well, this story tells us that the people of Israel looked back and they were able to note God's purpose and God's place in their life. And we are told that when they did, they had this sense of gratefulness. So much so, the story says, that one fine day, Moses gathered them all together in this spirit of gratitude, and he explained to them that it's time to build this tabernacle, a place to worship this loyal and wondrous God who had so blessed them in their lives. And then Moses unrolls a scroll of what was needed to serve God in that place. And off this scroll, he begins to tick off the needs. Folks, he says in Hebrew, I'll do it in English. Folks, we need some precious metals. We need some yarns and linen, some goat hair, some ram skin, some oils and spices and onyx and gems, some workmen, some weavers, some builders. And then, instead of giving a long-winded 2,400-word sermon, where you have a good opening and a good closing and you put them as close together as possible, Moses folds the scroll up and then he simply utters one sentence. So, let whoever is of a generous heart bring the Lord's offering. That's it. Imagine that. Moses simply let them know what needed to be done in order to do God's work in that place. And as Agnes Norfleet notes, nothing was mandated, nothing was required, no sermon about tithing. Moses didn't lay a guilt trip on them or lift up slick stewardship slogans. Moses simply appealed to their deep awareness of the abundant and undeserved goodness of God and offered a simple invitation. Let whoever is of a generous heart bring the Lord's offering. And then this is what's amazing. Because you know what happens next? The text tells us that the congregation went wild. The women and men went back to their tents. They collected their gold, their bronze, their silver. They brought it all to Moses. Those who had the gift of weaving wove rich tapestries of blue, purple, and crimson fabrics. Those who had the gift of woodworking began construction. The people came and they came and they came, morning, noon, and night, and they gave and they gave and they gave. As Walter Brueggemann notes, this congregation acted completely beyond the usual calculations of prudence and caution. So much so, you know what the result was. Because here's the conclusion to the story. After Moses' one-sentence sermon and the people's response, Moses was forced to gather all the people back together and deliver another sermon saying, folks, you got to stop giving now. That's enough. No more money, please. We have enough. We can't handle it anymore. Can you imagine a church doing that? Too much gold, silver, fine purple cloth, too much precious wooden carvings, too much of value is rolling in, so much generosity, giving out of gratitude. We simply can't handle it anymore, folks. Stop it. I wonder, you think that could happen to us? I mean, I wonder if 3 weeks from now, when our stewardship drive for 2015 is in full swing, if I'm going to have to stand up here and say, people, you got to stop giving. Our Monday morning offering counters cannot handle the influx of envelopes. Our computers have crashed trying to keep up with the rapidly rising balance in our church bank account. You got to hold off from giving anymore. Marine Bank is called begging for relief. PNC Bank's having to bring in reinforcements from Pittsburgh. Their tellers are in tears. The computers are burning out. Northern Trust said they can't afford any more overtime to calculate the influx. For never have they seen mounds of cash rolling into one customer's account before. And then I'd have to call the abbot of the monastery in Las Vegas. I'd have to say, Abbot, we need the chipmunks. We need some people here in Vero Beach to help us count. Our congregation's going wild. Yeah, we laugh about that, don't we? And yet I wonder why that's so far-fetched. Do we have less to be grateful for than those Israelites wandering around in the desert, living off the hope of God's promise? I mean, isn't our history as replete with the remembrances of God's goodness to us as the Israelites' history was? And couldn't our grateful response of generous giving be just as magnificent? Couldn't it be? I mean, let's try an experiment. Here's my scroll. Let's go past the purple cloth, the ram skin, goat hair. You probably don't have a lot of that. But if we look at the needs of Community Church, we see Kidtricity program to teach our children who even now are jumping up and down with the love of Christ. We have youth programs even now asking serious questions about faith. We have mission work with 36 agencies depending on our financial help to help the hungry and the homeless and the lonely. We have pastoral care and tutoring and funerals and weddings and baptisms and classes and programs and outreach. And beyond that, the music, the prayers, the preaching, the worship, and the efforts we make to extend open arms and open minds and open doors to everybody. That's the list. 2.1 million is needed to deliver it. We did it last year, and I pray we can do it again. But to do it, we will need your time, your energy, your financial gifts. Or as my good friend Jim Kidd used to say, we have some good news and we have some bad news about our stewardship campaign. The good news is that we have all the money we need. The bad news is it's in your pocket. Yet I can tell you, as one of your grateful pastors, that I expect your generosity to overflow in this season of stewardship. Because after 10 years, starting my 11th year here, you know what? I know most of you. And I know how much your life has been blessed. And I have seen you respond before. So let me close with a story that'll let you in on what kind of a church this truly is and why you should give generously to it. There's so many of these stories out there, but I've chosen this one for today. A few years back, Jefferson Park was a man who lived in a group home here in Vero Beach, and he was a regular attender to our church when he could get a ride. Jefferson had many challenges: mental, physical, and financial. But he came here anyway because he loved this church. And though he may not have come dressed in the latest fashion or the highest style, and though for Jefferson showers were kind of optional, you never offered him anything but welcome. and he found a home here. Last year, Jefferson Park died. A man with no family, no friends, just this church. You helped organize and pay for his memorial service and his internment in our memorial garden. Our men's fellowship decided that Jefferson deserved a funeral. And so they held one, and they came in mass because they believed everyone needs a time to be celebrated as a child of God. Jefferson Park in his life owned nothing but the clothes on his back, like so many in our community. Jefferson never owned a home of his own. He lived month to month waiting for a government check. The emergency room was his physician. The food pantry, his grocery store. The go line, his transportation. And to most of the world, Jefferson Park was a statistic. Just another hash mark to tally in the column of the hopeless and the lost. However, to you, Community Church of Vero Beach, Jefferson Park had an identity, and he had worth as a child of God. 3 weeks ago, our church needed to form a LLC, a limited liability corporation, for a few months just to purchase some property. And we needed to place a name upon that LLC other than Community Church of Vero Beach. And so we gathered. And it didn't take long to come up with a name for that LLC, a name we felt would best represent who we are, have been, and choose to be always as a church. And the name on the LLC is the name of our friend and brother who never owned a square foot of property in his life. It is the Jefferson Park Corporation. Today, Jefferson's name is on the title of a whole apartment building. God, Jefferson would have loved that. He would have been so proud. Could our congregation go wild in giving this stewardship season? I think we could. We have in the past, because I've seen you give so much. And I hope you'll do it again this year until we have to call a halt to it. And so, with that said, I'm going to take a page out of our Las Vegas churches this morning, and I'm going to roll the dice, trusting that one line will be enough to lead you to give to the work of this church this year. Let whoever is of a generous heart bring the Lord's offerings. Amen.